Amaury, you are responsible for forking Bitcoin into Bitcoin Cash, but you're never political. And you always saw this as some sort of minority chain that tries something different. And you maintain the same mindset with your latest project, which is eCash.
Yeah, so I mean, like ideally, I would have liked big blocks to happen on BTC, right? But you get to be realistic about what is possible. If a lot of people don't want that, then it's not going to happen. And you got to live with it, right? So then you do a minority chain.
Do you consider yourself an Austrian? Do you adhere to that school of thought? Or are you more into the Cypherpunk side where you just want to send money electronically without a trusted third party?
So I'm definitely on the Cypherpunk side of it, but I would say I'm mostly on the Australian economic side of it. But people put different meaning in that term, so it's a bit difficult. but I would say yes to both actually.
I don't think it's mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
When
So
you say medium of exchange and store of value.
Not only it's not mutually exclusive, it's actually the same thing. It's like transporting value as our cross space on time.
Now you sound like Michael Saylor.
No, but like the store of value property is being able to send money in the future. Like the store of value property is just the medium of exchange property on a different axis.
I can agree with that, except for the people who say, oh, I'm never going to spend any Bitcoin. I have it in cold storage forever.
So this is one of the reasons I put some caveat around saying I'm an Australian economist, because a lot of people are mentioning Gresham law when it comes to Bitcoin. Gresham law is like good money drives the bad. If you have two forms of money, you're going to spend the one that devalues, and therefore the one that you cannot spend is better. That's essentially the argument that is being made. I'm simplifying it a bit, obviously. There is a key element of Gresham law that they ignore, is that Gresham law assume that there is parity between the two forms of money. There is a fixed exchange rate. So if there is a fixed exchange rate between two forms of money, but one of them is inflating and the other one is not inflating, well, you want to spend the one that is inflating and keep the one that is not inflating. But if there is not a fixed exchange rate, then, just one loses value compared to the other, because people don't want to accept it as well. Like Gresham law rely on the fact that there is a fixed exchange rate. It doesn't work in a context of a variable exchange rate.
If you take it to the literature of Austrian economy, being an Austrian economist means loving gold and thinking that it's the best form of money.
Not really, I would say. Like if you read the Australian Economist, yeah, they say that money should have like a certain set of properties. Before crypto, gold was definitively the form of money that, as the characteristic that matched the ideal form of money. But crypto, if it scales, match actually those characteristics better. I made a presentation at that conference where actually I announced that I would fork Bitcoin and create BCH. And during that conference, at the start of it, I'm making exactly that point. If you ask traditional Australian economists, they're going to give you like a series of characteristics that money can have. And I show that both fiat and gold have some of those properties to some extent, but each of them don't have all the properties. And if we can have a cryptocurrency that scales very well, we can have a form of money that have all those properties.
You told me before we started recording that you were interested in extension blocks before you were interested in big blocks with hard forks. And the extension blocks are this proposal that allows you to fork basically something that's a lot like a sidechain, except that it's part of the client. And you can move coins back and forth between the main chain and the extension block.
Yeah. So Christopher Jeffrey made that proposal at the time. And I thought, technically, I think increasing the block size is just the simple stuff to do. And this is more complicated. So on the technical front, it's a bit less appealing, but I also knew that a lot of people were opposed to hard fork and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, this is more likely to get traction and to get, more people on board and actually make it work. So I worked on that for a while, but then there was this big like New York agreement that came up with Segwit 2x, and this proposal kind of lost traction. Sometimes, like the whole ecosystem goes in another direction.
But you also have an opinion on Segwit 2x, and you created Bitcoin Cash as a fork of Bitcoin specifically
Yeah.
because...
So because Segwit 2x was like, okay, we activate Segwits, and then a few months later, we activate the block size increase. And I was like, this is not going to work. This is going to be a bait and switch, which it ended up being. So I was like, all right, Segwit 2x is what people like most big blocker, they were supporting that. And I was like, this is not going to work. This is bad strategy. The extension block did not get any traction because Segwit 2x kind of like, vacuumed all the support it had. So I was like, okay, the only solution now is to have a minority fork of Bitcoin. And this is how I started working on BCH.
Yeah, and prior to that, what was Bitcoin ABC about?
Bitcoin ABC has been created for that purpose.
Okay, for some reason I thought it emerged before BCH.
Well, it has to be created before BCH if you want people to run it and even to deactivate BCH. But it was created a few months before BCH. So actually, this is not exactly true. Like the original purpose was to implement extension block, but then when it didn't work, I scrapped the extension block part of it and started implementing the BCH fork. This is how Bitcoin ABC happened.
How did you become the one to fork Bitcoin at the time? Why was it you? Why was it Bitcoin ABC that was the first client to run Bitcoin Cash, and it wasn't XT or Unlimited?
Because XT and Unlimited, they wanted to be the main Bitcoin. Like they wanted to be the Bitcoin, and they did not realize that their strategy was not good. You get to admit that the strategy was not so good. And the way they were interacting with each other, it was very competitive and scared off a lot of people as well. They were unable to agree on various consensus parameter of, the block size activation. And so it was a mess. And those people, they were not willing to do a minority fork because in a way, it's an admission that they fucked up. They could not make what they wanted to do work.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're fine from the beginning with the idea of a minority fork. And what were the miners or the businesses that supported Bitcoin Cash since day one?
Via BTC, obviously, mined the first block, so they were very supportive early on. Bitmain was as well. Services that were more cash-oriented, which almost all have disappeared by now, but all the services that were more payment-related, they supported BCH fairly quickly because at the time we already had the problem that we have right now where the transaction fees are, several dollars or euros or whatever, and it takes a long time to confirm and all of that. So there was a lot of interest in all the, payment-oriented side of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I recorded some interviews with business owners and exchange people who at the time were in favor of Segwit 2x when it first emerged. They even signed the New York agreement. But the moment they had Bitcoin Cash as the big block fork of Bitcoin, they realized, okay, we already have this. What's the point of Segwit 2x? And the way that they described it was that basically the Segwit 2x proposal failed because of Bitcoin Cash, which emerged. Do you think this is accurate?
No, I think Segwit 2x was dead on arrival. Those people were deluding themselves. This is one thing, like proponents of Big Block have had very serious flaws in their understanding of the game theory of Bitcoin, which small blocker were much better at. Do you remember UASF? People were like, effectively, I'm not going to upgrade my node to something that's going to increase the block size. I'm just going to activate Segwit and, I don't care about anything else. My node is going to do that. Do what the fuck you want. This was a very powerful move. And the big block size as a whole really did not understand that because they were like, well, the white paper says that the hash power decide, blah, blah, blah. So first, it's not what the white paper says. Most of those talks are based on the misunderstanding of what's written in there. But even if it was what was written in there, it doesn't matter. What's written on some paper cannot change the nature of reality and the economic incentive of the game. There is a very good analogy for that. You know that stupid game they do in some movies, where you have two cars that are moving toward each other. Effectively, the first person that decide to turn to avoid the other car is gonna lose in some way.
Yeah, and that's Too Fast and Furious.
Yeah, Fast and Furious is a good example of that. People who work on game theory, they have studied this kind of situation, and asked themselves, how do you maximize your chance of winning that game? And the way you maximize your chance of winning that game is that you rip the steering wheel of the car, you show it through the window, and you throw it away. Because now your opponent knows that you limited your own option by doing that. And you did so in a very visible manner so that your opponent knows that you don't have the option to steer away anymore. Right? So now what's going to happen is either we crash into each other or you avoid me. And this is what the UASF people did. They understood that whole game theory. And at the time, very few people did understand that, the big block side of things. And I tried to explain people like Anthony Ziegler also made a presentation about that at the time. But most people, they were just like, no, they were not willing. They were like, in their mind, like the white paper say this or say that. So it has to happen that way. This is not how reality works.
What was the thing that you liked about this whole scaling debate? Was there a certain proposal that you preferred over others?
Like scaling is not something like you do this one solution and then boom, you've scaled and it's fixed, right? You have a system, there is a bottleneck somewhere and you find a solution to remove the bottleneck and then you need to move on to the next one. But obviously the very obvious first bottleneck is the block size. It's relatively easy to change from a technical perspective. Then, obviously from a social one, it's a bit more complicated. You need to have the agreement of most of the community, which doesn't look like it's possible at this point. But I strongly disagree with people that are like, oh, you just grow the block size forever and ever and ever, and it's just going to work. No, at some point you're going to run into another bottleneck, and it turns out that you actually do around 20 megs or so, you start running into other bottlenecks.
Interesting. So you're saying that the limit right now from a technical perspective should be that of 20 megabytes, even with big blocks?
Yeah, up to about 20 megabytes, everything works fine with the current tech. To go further than that, you need to change a few things.
You are the maintainer of Bitcoin ABC, and there were also proposals such as Bitcoin XT and Bitcoin Unlimited that were seeking to double the block size. I think in XT it was every year or every couple of years, and Bitcoin Unlimited was in favor of this idea of dynamic block size, of allowing the free market to basically decide what the block size will be for the next block. And you're more, I guess, moderate in this regard. You look at the technical specifications and you think how you can retain the decentralization and offer a bit of scalability.
Yeah, so there are technical solutions to go further than that, but you need to exploit them. I'm not really opposed to dynamic block size system. I think it's actually a good idea. But when you do that, you get to realize that now you are in a race against the usage of the network, right? Like you have to implement those technical solutions to grow beyond 20 meg before the usage on the network is such as 20 meg is used. So that's a bit of things you need to be conscious about. I don't know who came up with that analogy. It's not me, but it's a very apt one. It's like the block size is like the speed limit. Say I want to go from France to Romania by car, let's say. So it takes a certain amount of time. And now you ask the question, oh, do you want to do that faster? Well, the obvious first bottleneck would be like you remove the speed limit or you increase the speed limit quite a bit on the highway, and then I can go faster and I'm going to arrive in Romania faster, right? And it's very clear that at the beginning it's going to work, but at some point it's going to get like very dangerous because the car is not suited anymore, and the infrastructure of the road and all of that is not secure anymore to drive at that speed. And then if you increase the limit even higher than that, then the car cannot even go at that speed. And so like there is literally no point in raising the limit, right? It's very much the same situation with the block size. Like if you grow a bit at the beginning, you're just going to be able to do bigger block for a while, but at some point you're going to run into problems that you need to solve in some way if you want to go further than that. It's just not going to happen by itself.
That's a smart analogy, probably made by Greg Maxwell. I don't know, I'm joking. It seemed like for a while, everyone who was into a big block version of Bitcoin was on the same page.
Oh, no. There was effectively 3 big factions. So when we created BCH, okay, so the people that had the same understanding about how the system works and the game theory behind it and stuff like that, like joined BCH pretty early on. But when Segwit 2x failed, 2 groups joined, right? And there was the Craig's Satoshi group that joined at that point. And there was like a group that I'm not sure what to call it, but it was like Roger and Bitcoin Unlimited, and and those three groups, they never really like coalesced very well, because the Craig Satoshi group of people, it's very obvious why there was, let's say, a disagreement with them. But the other group, they came in with all those ideas that made them fail the first time, pre-packaged, and ready to be deployed on BCH. This is why we ended up leaving, because dealing with those group of people was just, I was spending all my time dealing with the tension with those group of people.
In my mind at the time, there was only one faction that was super active on Reddit, complaining about, first of all, censorship on our Bitcoin.
So the faction on our BTC was mostly, I would say, like the Roger Bitcoin Unlimited faction. And as you mentioned, they were complaining about censorship and all of that. And to some extent, they have the right to complain about it, because I think some of the stuff that were done were, not quite right. Let's put it that way. But they did not realize that it was not the only reason, and it was not even the main reason why they were unable to deploy big block, at least in my opinion. I think they made very bad strategic mistakes. All those censorship events and whatnot, they did not help, but like, it's a bit of a conspiracy theory, to be honest, to be all about that.
RBF became super politicized, and it became something that big block implementations of Bitcoin wanted to avoid at all costs.
I would say it's neither technical nor political. It's economics at play. In Bitcoin, like you have it right now, RBF is unavoidable. Even if the core developer were to remove it from the node software, the miner would re-implement it behind their back. Why? Because they make more money this way. And so you should not expect people to do the thing that makes less money. It's obvious. And even if, just one miner does it, well, know that miner has a competitive advantage, which means it's going to grow larger and larger and control a bigger chunk of the network, up to the point where other miners are either going to have to do it as well, or they are going to be competed. In a way, like making that like a coding argument or a political argument about what's right and what Satoshi intended and whatnot, it's not even wrong, actually. It's completely irrelevant. People are just going to do it because this is what the incentives are. So if you don't want people to do that, you need to change the incentives so that they behave differently. Like, I'm not saying that to be diplomatic. Like, I think this is true. Like, there are just economic incentives, and people are going to do what is in their best interest economically. You should expect that. Actually, Bitcoin rely on that, right? Like, Bitcoin doesn't work if miner doesn't follow their self-interest. They wouldn't buy the network otherwise, and nothing would work.
So why did this work in Bitcoin Cash? And is this part of the eCash roadmap?
The only reason it works on BCH is because the fees are low, and so doing it is not very profitable. A miner that would do RBF on BCH would not gain a very significant advantage over other miners, because it's not running out of capacity to the point where fees are getting very high, and so that it's profitable to do that. So this is why miners are not doing it on BCH. Like, miners make a lot of money from fee, either because the fees are high, or because there are very large number of transactions that pay a low fee. But if the fee gets high on BCH, either because the number of transactions get high or because the fee per transaction gets high, then people are going to do RBF. You should expect them to.
Now, let me ask you about the Scaling Bitcoin conferences, because I guess you attended a few of them.
I'm not sure, actually. I think I attended one, but for the most part, I did not attend, because that was always quite bizarre. Like, those conferences, they happened after the fork, right? And they were like the Scaling Bitcoin conference, but that was always quite bizarre to me, because clearly at this point, Bitcoin had made a choice that they would prefer not change the rule and not scale as a result, and be some kind of digital gold of which the property we cannot affect. There is value in that, but once you go that path, you kind of like through scaling out of the window. I actually made a set of prediction in early 2017 before the fork. And it was about, why we're going to fork and create BCH. The prediction were like, if you don't remove the block size, you're effectively acting as a production quota on the transaction. And so here is like what economic textbooks are going to tell you happens. There is a gap between the price that people are willing to buy at and the price that people are willing to sell at. And people in between are going to be able to impose themselves as intermediary and collect the difference. And it's what you see. The theory at the time is that this fee market would be created, and fee would be high and it would pay the miners. But as we see, there is no equilibrium point in the fee market, or the fees are exorbitantly high so that people leave the network until, there is like sufficiently few people that want to transact that it fits in the block. And at some point, the fee like go back to pretty much zero. There is no equilibrium point there. Who takes the cut? It's actually not the miner. It's like intermediary that are going to be able to process transaction outside of the blockchain. Like people like Coinbase that allows you to transfer from wallet to wallet without really going through the blockchain. Or like ETFs is another example right now. I can buy a Bitcoin ETF and there is never any coin that moves. And so the prediction at the time, would say that, okay, you're not gonna see a fee market from the miner. You're gonna see expensive transaction fee, and you're gonna see like intermediary that pose themselves as custodial and operate the Bitcoins instead of the user. And this is what we've seen over the past several years. So this is something that always has been a bit disappointing to me. But anyway, right? Like when you go that road, and this is what's gonna happen, it's quite predictable. Once you make that choice, you've decided that Bitcoin is not gonna scale, and not just for technical reason, but also now they are a set of actors that have an incentive because part of their business model know that Bitcoin doesn't scale, and so therefore they can be an intermediary and take their cut. And so all those actors know they become economically incentivized toward like preventing any kind of scaling on Bitcoin. So it's not going to happen.
Bitcoin Cash has had its halving yesterday,
Yes.
and it had some hiccups in the first 24 hours with blocks being mined after 2 hours.
Well, that happens. So there is a price ratio between BCH and BTC. Miner are gonna put hash power in between the two, usually in proportion of the price ratio, right? Because that's the profitable thing to do, really. There's no other reason. So when suddenly BCH cut its emission by half, it becomes really unprofitable to mine BCH versus mine BTC. And therefore, most of the hash that is on BCH move to BTC. And you're going to see the opposite in a few days, when Bitcoin is going to halve later this month. You're going to see a lot of block mine very quick on BCH for a while until the difficulty on BCH adjusts. That's how it is, that's what happens.
What are your opinions on the Lightning Network?
I like it. It does some use cases very well, but it's not a general purpose scaling solution. And I was a bit dishonest to promote it that way because I don't know if you watched the original presentation of Lightning Network from Joseph Poon and Tadjria, but they run some estimation number and they were like, okay, if we want to make that work worldwide and scale, we're going to need probably 300 meg blocks anyway. Yeah, this is what they estimate they need with Lightning Network to make everything work. So I think their estimate is even a bit optimistic. I think, actually you would need even more than that. We can always, debate the specific assumption that you make to come up with that number. But the point is like people, even in the early days of Lightning Network, knew that in itself, it wouldn't be a sufficient scaling solution. On the other hand, it's really cool technology and it solves various use cases, like any kind of like streaming amount of money, security deposit, or like there are plenty of use cases that are very well served by the Lightning Network. It's just not a general purpose scaling solution for Bitcoin.
What do you think about the Liquid Federation?
Not much, actually. For me, it's not very interesting. That doesn't mean it's bad, or it's not going to work or whatever. It's a centralized system, effectively, and allows to work around, like problem of scaling once again. And it fits in the pattern of stuff that I said, like if you don't scale, you're going to see this series of services that are going to be more or less centralized. And to be fair to the Liquid stuff, it's more on the less centralized side of things, rather than, say, a custodial system. But, they solve a problem, but I would rather we don't need them.
These days, everyone's building something with ZK rollups.
Rollups is, I want to say, similar to Lightning Network. The tech is completely different, but in terms of the characteristics and limitation that they're going to have, it's pretty similar. You need to be able to commit on the chain at any point. So when the chain is clogged, you have issue. You also have a liquidity issue as a result, right? Because what is in a payment channel or in a rollup or whatever is not in another rollup, is not in another payment channel or whatnot. So if you want to use that as scale, you end up having liquidity issues. And those two problems we see today, both with rollups and Lightning Network, they are economic problems. They are not technical problems. So even though the technical aspect is like 100% completely different, the economical problem is the same.
I did read that it has some sort of roadmap, right? That's kind of centralizing when you think about it, but it's also proof that these developers are committed and want to ship something.
I don't think the roadmap is necessarily centralizing, right? So people have to congregate around something, and typically it's going to be like either other people, right? So you have a leader and we do whatever the leader say, or it's going to be some kind of bureaucracy or institution. It's like, okay, we have a process to make decisions, and the decision made by the process are what they're going to be, right? Like it's like administration works that way. Or otherwise you have like a goal. We're going there. If you want to come there with us, then, come along and help us. And it's going to be the roadmap way of doing things. No, obviously the congregating around a person is by definition going to be centralized. The bureaucratic way of doing things, depending on how you organize the bureaucracy, is going to be either decentralized or centralized, but it's always very inefficient, right? Like bureaucracy are inefficient by design. So now you have left the project or the roadmap way of doing things. If you want to build that thing, then, like come with us if you're interested. Otherwise, well, you can do something else, right?
What is so radically different that will never make it end up in Bitcoin?
Effectively, we use two consensus algorithms. We use the Nakamoto consensus that exists in Bitcoin. It works the same way in eCash. And we use the Avalanche consensus algorithm, which is a different consensus algorithm that comes with different trade-offs. Obviously, one of the plus side is that it's way faster, right? It can come to consensus over the network in like 2 seconds, roughly, give or take. Even, when they are in disagreement, in 2 seconds or so, they can converge toward the solution, which is great, right? Because the Bitcoin system, it takes, a multiple of 10 minutes to do that. So it's significantly faster. Obviously, you never get anything for free. I would say the main downside is that you don't have an historic trail. Like you don't have an historic artifact of the consensus like you have with a blockchain. I can go away in the woods for like 5 years without a computer, and I can come back and run my computer and run my Bitcoin node, and it's going to catch up with the chain and be consensus with everybody. Avalanche does not do that. If you want to know what is the consensus with Avalanche, you need to be there live participating in it. After the fight, you have to trust someone that's going to tell you. And this is why we don't move like purely to Avalanche. We use a combination of the two so that you can still catch us up later. You still have this trail and this blockchain. But because we can come in agreement on the network on specific question very quickly, one of the things that we can do, for instance, is when a new block is found, well, it's going to be distributed on the network, and the different nodes are going to update the tip of the chain, like they do on any Bitcoin style network. But then they're going to run an avalanche round on the tip of the chain between themselves, right? And all the nodes that are there are like, okay, what is your tip? I have a new tip. This is that one. Tack. And if everybody agree that the new tip is whatever block it is, then they're not going to accept a reorg of that because they know that this alternative chain has been produced fraudulently after the fact, which is the kind of thing I think is a good thing because it's better for the user. The network is more predictable. But I think this is something that most people in the BTC ecosystem would refuse.
And does this Avalanche protocol use proof of stake?
So yes and no. When people say proof of stake, usually what they mean is that it uses Nakamoto consensus, but instead of using proof of work, it uses proof of stakes. It's usually what people mean by proof of stake. And in that sense, no, it doesn't. But it needs a system to be Sybil resistant. So one of the problems you have in decentralized consensus algorithm is that what happens if one actor spin out like 1,000 nodes and pretend to be 1,000 different actors? How do you prevent that actor to take over the network? Proof of work is one way you do that, right? Because if you require each actor to do some amount of work, then the person to spin up like 1,000 nodes to have 1,000 times the weight, it needs to do 1,000 times the work. Doesn't matter how many nodes it has. And another way to solve that problem is to use proof of stake. It's like, okay, you had to prove that you own a certain amount of coin. And so now if you want to spin out the 1,000 node, then you need 1,000 times more coins to do that. But you need to tie the node to some scarce resources for Sybil resistance. And so that is true both on Nakamoto and on Avalanche. But the proof of stake itself is not part of creating a chain with a weight that is measuring proof of stake. So in that sense, it's different from all the other proof of stake system out there except AVAX.
Did you add the Avalanche Protocol because you're concerned about the hash rate being in a minority and you could get 51% attacks? Or do you still use SHA-256?
We still use SHA-256, yes. So Avalanche protects us against 51% attack in that way. So that is a motivation, but that's not the only motivation. It solves just such a variety of problems. For instance, even on Bitcoin, you're like, okay, if you transfer a large amount of money, you're going to wait for 6 confirmation, right? Well, on eCash, you just have to wait for 1 plus 2 seconds for Avalanche to run. And once you do that, the block is finalized, it's not going to be a reorg. So that's just better user experience. And we are working on doing that at the transaction level. So once you do a transaction, like a few seconds later, boom, it's done. It's not going to be double spent. Generally, what is interest for us is the digital cash aspect of it. And it's the name, right? It's eCash as in like electronic cash. So we are looking at anything that can improve the user experience for this type of use case. And Avalanche is really, really a really good fit there, because when you pay something cash to a merchant or whoever, the money cannot magically, go out of the pocket of that person and go back into your pocket, 10 minutes later by some kind of crazy consensus algorithm, right? That should not be possible, and that's possible on Bitcoin. So we think that it's a UX problem that needs to be solved, regardless of the security concern. And the fact that it solves security concerns as well is, very nice added bonus, but even without the security concern, we'd be doing it.
The message from Polstores, I guess, is some sort of job offer, because he said, "Are you French? Are you a large blocker? You might enjoy Drivechain." So he's basically saying, "Oh, you should work on this."
Yeah. Also, I think Drivechain is very interesting and kind of like big block. It's been painting in the bad light, but it's something people should look into. So right now I'm working on eCash, and obviously it doesn't have the same network effect as BTC or BCH could enjoy, but I think from a text perspective, it's much more interesting. Actually, many of the ideas that we have in there are similar to Drivechain, but because we are less constrained, we can do more interesting things. The big problem with Drivechain and all similar system is the reverse peg. It's a very difficult problem, and there are many different ways to solve this that come with various different trade-offs. And what Drivechain is making is that they are using a system of consensus with the miner, but the problem is now you have 2 mining chains that have to come to consensus. Long story short, it takes a very long time. And there are ways to work around that, but ultimately it takes a very, very long time to do the reverse peg. And the thing that we do on our site, so we call that subnet, but the idea is very similar. You can have subnet, which are other chain with other consensus rule, exactly like before. But we don't use the same techniques to do the reverse peg. We use another consensus algorithm that is called Avalanche, instead of using just Nakamoto consensus. And that allows the reverse peg to be significantly faster.
So basically you're experimenting something else with the Bitcoin code base. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah.
No, I can respect
like
that,
a few of the stuff that we're doing are hard fork, but remarkably little. Like we are closer in terms of consensus rule to BTC than BCH is at this point, for instance. All the stuff that we're doing as Avalanche, for instance, is also fork. Whatever the privacy system that you use, right? Whether it be one like you described, or a zero knowledge, or something with ring signature like Monero, like whatever it is, you're gonna lose auditability, right? This is the whole point. It's like another system in which you value privacy more than auditability, and it's fine. But it's important to keep the two segregated in some way, because people are gonna value the auditability of Bitcoin 100%. But a Bitcoin that you can move into one of those systems and get back into Bitcoin later on is a more valuable Bitcoin, I think. Because if that system explode, well, just the thing on the side explode and the main chain remain unscathed.
I think you started quite an interesting debate within the big block community when you proposed dev taxes. Was this part of the reason why you decided to fork off? Because you wanted to get paid basically for your work?
It's actually quite funny that people say that because I never took any money from that. It was used to pay other developers. But nevertheless, like you need resources to build something good. And if people are not willing to provide resources, if they say, oh, we don't want a self-funding mechanism, from the block reward. Okay, well, fine, but are you going to pay for it? No. Are you going to convince someone else to pay for it? Are you what are you going to do about it? Because if you don't want that, the money needs to come from somewhere. If you look at how much money is spent maintaining BTC and Ethereum, it's probably at least 10 million a year for each that is spent on various development work that is required to do the maintenance properly. And where we were running BCH, we were saying that we need 2. That's quite a price, but that's also 5 times less than the big player in the space. We were quite economical in our approach. If we want to play in the same playing field as the big guys, well, this is the kind of money that we need to do the kind of work that is required to be there. You cannot be in a situation where you are expected to play at that level while you have an order of magnitude less resources than what you would need to play at that level. It's just not sustainable. One thing that we've done, actually more than 6 months ago, we remove that mechanism from the consensus rules, which means that if people are unhappy about the situation, they can change it without causing a fork or anything. If, say, you are not happy with the amount or even that we get anything or whatever, you can make a modified version of the node software. Is probably going to be less than 10 lines of code to modify. And you publish that, and if enough people run it, then it's what it's going to be. It's not a consensus rule anymore. So that, we are not baked into the consensus rule of the network. We've made it that one purpose.
In a very early version of the Bitcoin white paper that Satoshi was sending around to people, he was calling it eCash because he was trying to fix this double spending problem to something that was inherently centralized in the 90s. This is why, in some ways, Satoshi Nakamoto is regarded as the guy that solved the holy grail of digital cash.
I don't know if you know that, but there is actually a proof, a mathematical proof, that solving the double spend problem is impossible. So as a result, a lot of people thought that it was impossible. And, technically in the mathematical sense, the proof is correct. But where Satoshi was smart is that the system actually never really converges, right? So what happens is that as you pile more and more blocks on top of a decision, you are more and more certain than your transaction that has been mined in the block is not going to be reorged by a double spend, right? But you never reach 100% in the mathematical sense of the term, right? You're going to reach 99.99999 something, right? So in that sense, Satoshi solved the problem for all practical purposes, but it's not solved in the mathematical sense of the term. You probably cannot reach 100%.
And I appreciate that you were honest to the extent that you took it to a very technical level. You did not want to talk about people or events or something like this. You explained why from a technical point of view, and this is something I can respect. And your fascination with creating internet money that combines different ideas that were not tried together before, I also respect that. So good luck with your eCash. And so how can people follow you? This is another question.
Twitter is where I'm going to be the most easy to join, I guess.
It's Dad Elnix.
Yeah. And that name is the same on GitHub. If there is that name somewhere, it's or me or someone trying to impersonate. Probably it's me.